Why do we sometimes do what we know is wrong? It's not a simple question to answer. Aristotle attempts to answer this question in his Nicomachean Ethics as part of his discussion over his disagreement with Socrates as to whether moral weakness, that is, akrasia, even exists. As Aristotle says, Socrates is completely opposed to the view that someone might know what is right and do what is wrong. As we've talked about in previous videos that you can find on Daily Moral Philosopher on Instagram, Socrates' view is that it's based on ignorance in some way. But Aristotle responds that this is plainly at variance with the facts, and he gives akrasia, that is moral weakness, a distinct place in his analysis. For Aristotle, there's virtue, there's vice, and in between the two, there's moral strength, where we struggle and eventually do the right thing, and moral weakness, where we struggle and give in to what we know is wrong. Now, Aristotle wants to find as much truth in Socrates' position as possible. One doesn't disagree with Socrates lightly. So in order to answer this question, Aristotle makes two important distinctions. The first distinction is between universal and particular knowledge. The second distinction is between active and passive knowledge. Active knowledge is what you're attending to in the moment. Passive knowledge is when you're not thinking about it. It's like potential knowledge. So an example of universal knowledge, as far as this debate goes, would be something like, I know that this type of action is wrong. We'll use a non-serious example like, I know this type of food is bad for me, or it's wrong to eat this food. Particular knowledge would be something like, this is the kind of food that fits that description that I shouldn't eat, right? Maybe you're diabetic and this is a candy bar or something or whatever. So what Aristotle thinks is going on is in cases of akrasia, our active knowledge becomes passive in some way. As Aristotle says, it's not universal knowledge that's overcome. It's particular knowledge, like the particular knowledge that this is something I shouldn't do. So for Aristotle, what happens is our active knowledge, he says, becomes passive. He uses the analogy of being dragged, like a slave being dragged away. For Aristotle, our emotions or appetites drag our active knowledge into becoming passive knowledge in some way. So he agrees with Socrates that it's not universal knowledge that's overcome, but he still thinks there's some kind of akrasia. Now, there's much more we need to say about it, and there's different interpretations, and it gets quite complicated. But the basic idea is that Aristotle thinks that akrasia does occur when our active knowledge of this particular thing, as being an example of something we shouldn't do, is dragged from active knowledge to passive knowledge. Now, how does that happen? Well, one possibility he doesn't bring up that I want to talk about in future videos is that we are rationalizing what we know is wrong in some way. And that's why we cease attending to what we know is right, or why it becomes muted in some way, and we aren't really recognizing it fully. So we'll talk about that in future videos.